little past time that we started lifting the discussion about donor data out of the realm of data geek, data wonk, data nerd, right? And into this is really a governance issue. It's an issue for every fundraiser everywhere to be paying attention to. And the more these things happen and the more visible it gets, the more our donors are going to start demanding of the nonprofit sector that we pay attention to donor privacy, that we tackle these topics, and that we are on top of these topics. And I see my friend Scott joining us. Before he jumps in, because as I said, Scott and I can go on about this today. I think it's really, I think one of the critical things to note is there are several bills going through committees and in Congress now on federal legislation on data privacy, much like GDPR. So I don't want to be all, the sky is falling, but this is going to be the topic of 2021, and it's going to come to us. And the more we can prep now and really get ourselves ready for it, the better we're all going to be, and the better our fundraising is going to be, right? So, yeah. Do I have thoughts on it? Yes, a few.
Scott, do you have any initial thoughts as we set up the conversation? We're gathering some questions as we speak, but just wanted to get initial sort of ideas, and you help all of our virtuous customers with their own data migration and organization and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big thing is, and I know this was kind of mentioned in the responsive weekly email idea too, but most people tend to think of data privacy or controls as a technical issue or a technology issue only. Hey, if I buy the right technology, if I buy it from the right vendor, if I ask them the right questions up front, then I'm good, and that's kind of where my responsibility ends. And the key is that the responsibility is really on the organization, it's on everybody, to make sure that we're training our staff effectively and that we are creating good internal policies for how we handle and control data and access to data. And all of that is, what do we store? Where do we store it? Who has access to it? And who can control it and create all of that data? Those are the things that are going to be more important than anything that I'm going to get, no matter what technology solution I'm using. And I don't just say that because I'm a trainer. Training is important no matter what.
You're 100% correct on that, Scott. Agree completely. Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting problem that sort of everybody experiences, but it's also specific to nonprofits, is that we want to share information, right? That's how you create those more meaningful and generous donor engagements. But as you said, Scott, the access does need to be limited so that it stays safe and secure, and also it stays organized in a way that you can pull those insights that you need to do that better fundraising.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's in our DNA to have open access to data within the organization. Right? That's built into Virtuous. That's part of why fundamentally we don't charge by the user seat like a lot of other systems do. We don't want there to be gatekeepers to data, but there are limits to that, right? And one of the things I say all the time in training is like, hey, just because I can see something doesn't mean that I can edit it, doesn't mean I can change it, doesn't mean I can manipulate it, because I shouldn't have access to do that just because I can see it. And just because I could see financials overall to know how are we doing as an organization, so we're all moving in the same direction, we're all working towards the same goal, doesn't mean I can see every piece of personal information about Clay necessarily, because I might not need access to that. So while we do believe that there should be more access to information, to goals and financials and other things within a lot of nonprofits, I still have to have smart controls in place, especially around who can manage all of that data.
And Scott, if I could add to that, it's who can manage it, who can access it, but it's also, and this is why I say data is a governance issue, is because it becomes about where is it stored and how is it used and how is it how is it funneled throughout the organization, and what is the approach that we take to data? And I'm seeing some questions pop up in the Q&A already, and this I think kind of starts to address it. That data security, it becomes part of that responsibility and how we manage and use and track the data. Like the day of multiple Excel sheets with lists of donors and their address, like that has to end.
Yes.
And I say it in jest, but I also mean it critically seriously, because not only could hackers get to your CRM, as we have unfortunately seen, but can get into your system and emailing data back and forth, and the security of it. Here's the thing. Seth Godin says that we are living in a connection economy. He is 100% correct. Personal information, data, is the fuel of that economy. Being able just to talk to and reach and know information about our audiences and our donors is what drives all of that. So data needs to be seen as an asset and protected like any other asset that we have in an organization, with that same level of care and scrutiny and leadership and policy to it. And I know that's a big lift. Like, it's a huge lift, I get it. But I do think that this data breach that we've seen has pointed out to us that the nonprofit sector is vulnerable just as much as any other sector.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, right? There's things that you can't control, right?
Right.
In terms of the technology that exists for your CRM and what protections are in place there. But the things that you can control are, like you said, did I download an Excel sheet with every donor's home address, birth date, and all their other PII, and then attach that in an email and send that to 7 people? Because all the security in the world isn't going to stop people from accessing that thing that I just emailed. Am I, and you want to talk about something that is pretty relevant, am I storing slips of paper with people's credit card numbers on them and putting them into the filing cabinet behind me? Because I got to stop doing that too. And for goodness sakes, if you don't have a system that is PCI compliant, and a lot of the CRMs are not, right? The merchant service is separate. Don't store credit cards, and unless there is some very specific programmatic reason, and even then I'd ask you 10 questions beforehand, don't put a social security number anywhere in that database, because that's just not being a good steward of your donor's information in that case.
Exactly. And McKenna, don't let me run off.
No,
if you've got
sorry,
a list of questions
you're
or
in trouble
topics,
now.
right. But to your point though, Scott, about very sensitive information like credit cards, like Social Security, right? All of that. I hope that we collectively all understand that, yeah, that is very serious data. Here's the thing though, with the Blackbaud hack, my understanding, I may be wrong, but my understanding is the information that was actually hacked did not include anything like Social Security, credit card, et cetera. It was primarily name, phone number, address, email, contact information, which really points out that even that level of information is valuable to hackers and folks going after data. So how do we safeguard ourselves against even, I don't want to say it's simplistic, but just even that kind of demographic information is valuable and wanted on the market. So storing copies of checks. Yes.
And date
exactly.
of birth. Date of birth is you can't even get that in data pens anymore, a full date of birth, because it is person identifiable information that's used as a recovery for your bank account.
That's right.
All that kind of stuff.
That's right. So
we don't think
not only the safeguard protocols of the system itself, and a good system, and I know you all will have security protocols in place, and that is partially on the vendor to provide, but also our own internal protocols, and knowing that everybody that touches data is responsible for the security of it. So even emailing lists back and forth internally, putting that in a secure folder on a file. If this makes me nuts, if you're working with a vendor that tells you, of any type, a consultant, a vendor, anybody, and that tells you to, just email me the list, fire that vendor and get a new one, please. Because that is probably one of the single biggest safety protocols that that we can take is stop emailing lists of data. Many vendors, myself included as a consultant, if you email me data, I will destroy it, shred it, remove it do everything that I can to remove it, and force you to send it via secure transfer, because it's just, it is too valuable in the marketplace. We're seeing this. It's too valuable in the marketplace to keep just simple security protocols and not have those in place.
100%. Oh, go ahead, McKenna. We're just going to keep talking. So
yeah, we will. Everybody will sign off. Scott and I will still be sitting here. We've been doing this for what, Scott? Is it 10 years that we've known each other now?
I think so.
Could it be that long?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was going to say that I think one of the things, and Eric asked, what can we learn from this to safeguard ourselves? And I also think that you talked about sort of that like basic information about, you know, your phone numbers and all of those things and email addresses, but to the donor, those are the most important things, because I don't want people to be able to call me. I don't want random people in my inbox. And you have to not only take accountability for random people to be able to contact donors, but then you also have to make those crisis communications. You have to explain why that's happened. And so even though it isn't the most precious information about people, which you obviously want to guard against, that contact information to the day-to-day of your donor's life is the most valuable, right? Because I don't want people calling me for no reason.
I think you make such an important point there. And one of the ways we as a sector can start to shift our thinking about data is when a donor makes a gift to us, we're very good about talking about stewardship, right? And we have stewardship protocols in place. We all know the value of stewardship with the gift that they gave us, but they also gave us their name. They gave us their contact information. Essentially, at a transactional level, they said, hey, I trust you to know this about me. And if they opted into communications, gave us their mobile number, their email address, whatever it may be, they have said to us, hey, I trust you to safeguard this and that you have it. But that doesn't mean that I gave everybody else permission to it. So there becomes a stewardship responsibility to us. As a data security is a stewardship issue, right? It's a trust issue and transparency, how we use it, how we manage it, how we take care of that donor by taking care of the things they've entrusted to us, like their name, their phone number, their email, all of that. And their gift or their volunteer time or whatever they may be.
I like the idea of valuing that as a currency almost equivalent to their time or their money or anything else that they've given to me, and making sure that I'm showing the same level of care for that. Because it really is. It's equally valuable. Yeah.
And again, I keep coming back to this point. This is why I also keep saying it's a governance issue, because it's an asset, because we're valuing the stewardship, engaging the board. And I know it's not something boards want to talk about, but engaging the board and executive leadership on understanding the potential impact, because what we will potentially see too is, you know, fines for using data incorrectly, fines for violating laws, fines for violating protocols. Like this can become pretty big in terms of the impact. So it really does elevate to that level of organizational identity. And the protocols surrounding, and I know this is big stuff, and like, do we have time to deal with this? And it's a lot, but we need to bring it up because anybody that touches data, right? If we put a data policy in place, that's not just a policy for the CRM manager, for the account manager, for the fundraisers. That's an organizational policy, which means it raises to the level of human resources, which means it raises to the level of governance as well, because everybody that can have access to that is now responsible for it. And as a hire, I need to know I will have access to confidential data. I am held accountable to the organization, right? It becomes an employment policy as well that needs to be lifted to that same level of discussion. I do want to go back though, because there was a question early on, how do donor privacy laws overlap with donor data security? Exactly that. Having these policies and procedures and protocols in place that address and understand what the privacy laws are and setting organizational security around how data is used, tracked, measured, etc.
And so the funny thing is, while I think it is traditionally not something that the board wants to talk about, it's not something they want to talk about until it's too late and you should have talked about it. But I also think that right now, because this is sort of a hot topic in the sector in general, this is when your board is probably most willing to focus on it. And so if you in your organization have been beating this drum and you've been saying we need to have some stricter policies around how we do this, now is the time when they're going to be more willing to have that conversation, because they're seeing this fallout in other organizations in terms of what's happened with their data. And the other thing is, this also means, and this is the thing where I kind of go, oh geez, if we're talking about the fact that I need to train up my staff, and I need to make sure that they're following certain policies and they're maintaining certain standards. Hi, Noah.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, Noah.
That also means that the days of saying, well, I have some random volunteers that do gift entry for me sometimes on Tuesdays, that's not something that I can do anymore. I can't have someone who just walked in the door, spent an hour or two and plugged some checks into my database. That needs to be something that I have some really, really strict controls for. And I know that's hard for small orgs sometimes.
It is. I mean, can you set security protocols in place and like still use a volunteer to enter? Yes, but we're now at the stage of make sure you talk with your legal counsel. Is there a policy in place? How are you affected? Oh my gosh, Scott, I know you've done it. I know you've done it. I have too. Taking lists home so you can address envelopes in front of the TV. No, like we can't do that anymore, I mean, things like that, the more sophisticated that we are. I do want to, I love that Noah's here, right as we're right in the thick of this. Two things to your points though, Scott. Number one, we're all working more virtually. And that adds another layer. That's why it's brought it up for scrutiny, is because we're all accessing remotely. And that's a very different world. And that lifts it up into what are the securities. Number two, we have to look at fundraising in the context of COVID and working remotely and all of that. And we have to look at fundraising in the context of racial and social justice now. And the equity that managing data and paying attention to data and data security brings to the equality discussion, because we start to value what people have told us about themselves and their names and who they are. Managing data appropriately also becomes a way of developing the conversation on inclusion and equity within the organization as we look at who our donors are. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Sorry, I just saw the questions pop up. I had missed all of them before, so I got distracted like a goldfish. Well, and I think especially right now, it says
on your resume that you can multitask. I have seen that.
Oh, you put stuff on the resume all the time. It's got to look good.
Wait, T. Clay, why are you seeing Scott's resume? Scott, are you shopping? Like, come on.
We've known each other along. Scott, there was a Scott and Clay before there was a Noah, my friend.
That's fine, and that's probably true in a lot of different ways too.
So far, we have not broken into a musical theater number, but we've still got a few minutes left.
I was gonna say, if it was a longer call, we'd be tap dancing.
I would like to see the Broadway version of the donor stewardship, playbook.
It's data exclamation point the musical.
Well, there we go. I like it. I feel like we could get some crowdfunding maybe. Like, is anyone interested in funding this project?
Yeah.
But I do think it's the idea of the distributed team right now in light of COVID brings back some of those bad habits, because the point before where you would have said, okay, great, well, everything is centrally controlled and we're in the office, especially anybody who has software that is located on premise that you're managing in a server. Now you're talking about having to set up some remote access, remote desktop access to get to that. And the urge to say, I'm just going to attach it in Gmail. I'm just going to send it to somebody. I'm going to shoot it to you over Facebook Messenger or something random like that is even more difficult. And it means that not only did you have to have a governance policy before, but now you need to have a remote work policy to govern how you're going to handle that data too. So it's another layer on top of it.
Mm-hmm. And writing policy and developing these policies is tough work, and it's hard. I know. It is such an important investment though, and so worth it, that in the midst of scramble and in the midst of COVID and how are we going to hit year end and all of the things that are going on, I just want to encourage everybody that investing the time in these policies and raising this to the level of leadership so that executive leadership is seeing this and understanding this as well. It is so worth the investment right now.
Yeah, and we just had a question come in too that says, how can staff share data internally? And if you've got an internal network drive, which is where you're storing data, that is a great way if you have to have something that's taken out of the CRM or out of your system to be able to say, hey, it's located here. You can go get it, but not attach a file. But the other thing is, for virtuous users, if instead of sending you a file, I say, hey, I've created a query, you can go find it in Virtuous, here's the name of the query, here's the link, and keeping all the data there so that I'm using all of the security that's already built into my CRM is the other thing. I don't have to email spreadsheets or CSVs or lists anymore because I have a few different options for being able to do that. If I do need to share something externally, that's when you start talking about using some kind of an FTP setup. You'd have to use Box or something that has an extra layer of security beyond an email attachment.
I have a question though. To that point. I mean, we have great tools, better tools than we've ever had in terms of being able to share, I mean, if you're on Office, you can share Excel sheets without having to, all kinds of things, Google Drive. And I don't get the Google, I'm old, it just doesn't sync with me, but we all have our things. Here's the thing though. Think about it from a true cost accounting point of view. I have spent the better part of my life massaging and cleaning data lists every time I pull a file, right? Adjusting the name, cleaning it up, blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be need for that. But from a true cost accounting perspective, where are you spending your time? Are you spending your time downloading and cleaning a list every time you need to use it? Or should you invest the time in cleaning it within the CRM so that you're pulling clean queries and lists far more, right? Again, investing in that downstream approach versus always being behind it, it's take the time for it because it does pay off.
I talked to a client who said they had to go through every mailing file and pull out the people that they always exclude. So I need to be able to export it, pull people out manually and put it back into the system. And I said, well, what if they were already flagged in the system so that you didn't do all that work every month when you send your mailer, right? Mm-hmm. These are small things. And we think like, oh man, that's going to take so much time. Well, how much time are you spending every month when you manually pour over that thing and you take that Excel file with you to Panera and sit and go through it? If you could get it in the CRM and get it set up, then you'd be good.
All right, guys. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I am.
Told you.
Yes.
Noah, thanks for piping in.
Yeah, I just wanted to show my face just so I could say hi to the data guys.
But I want to thank everybody.
Before you wrap us up, can we have fun with data? That to me is just a key thing too. Like Scott and I are dorks and we enjoy it, but can we make data like fun and understand what an impact it is across the board? Okay, I'm done.
Well, I think that's a great point because that is like the data and the numbers are how you get to know people individually. That doesn't always make sense or is not intuitive to everyone, but it is when you watch those numbers, especially over time, historically, you get to know people and you get to know their behavior. And it is really fun. You just have to keep it safe.
Well, and I've heard someone say that donors are data.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, I've heard that
somewhere.
Yeah, somebody, man, he must have been a smart guy.
Smart guy, good looking too.
I really advocate for McKenna to shut this down because last time we did get kicked off. We do have like a product overview walkthrough. So if you're curious how Virtuous does this, we can drop the link. That starts in 4 minutes. So that's why we have to cut off and go. So I'll kick it back to you, McKenna.
Yes, just wanted to say, Eric asked if we would make this available. Yes, I will email it directly to everyone who participated today, but then also it will be available on next week's newsletter. So you can see it all there. And there'll be some highlights on social if we want to talk about this more. And thank you very much to all of you for joining. And I really appreciate all of your insights. So we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
You're the best.